A very warm welcome to our event today, and thank you for joining this live stream. My name is Gunther Wolf, and I'm the director of Bruegel, and I'm very pleased to host today a discussion on empowering the recovery. And as you see in this word, we already have a pun. We talk about power, we talk about the energy sector and the green recovery. And I'm happy to host today a star panel with Kadri Simpson. She's the European Commissioner responsible for energy and a former Minister of Economics from Estonia, a member of the Centrist Party. Welcome, Commissioner.
Good afternoon.
And I'm also happy to welcome Francesco Starace. He's the CEO of Enel, the Italian energy company, since 2014. And he's a graduate in nuclear engineering from Politecnico Milan, and of course sits also on various advisory boards, such as the UN's Sustainable Energy for All initiative. Welcome, Mr. Starace.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as a housekeeping rule, let me also mention that we are in this event also taking questions from our online audience. For that, please go on the website Slido, and type in the keyword power, just like empowering the recovery power. And then just type your question, and in the second half of our conversation, I will go and ask some of those questions to our guests today. Commissioner Simpson, let me start with you. The Commission revealed yesterday its long-awaited proposal for the next multi-annual financial framework, and in particular for the so-called Recovery Fund. We are talking here of huge headline numbers: 1.1 trillion for the regular MFF, 700 billion for the next generation EU. And so this is a lot of money. And perhaps you can start by explaining to our listeners, what does next generation EU actually mean? I mean, it's a term that I hadn't heard before. And does it actually mean that we are heading for a green recovery, and that Brussels is actually designing a green recovery out of this pandemic that, of course, constitutes the biggest economic shock to the global economy, certainly since World War II? So are we getting a green recovery, and what is next generation EU really?
Thank you for a very good question. And well, I have to admit that this has been one of the most intense weeks for Commission since we started with our mandate. And I'm really glad that we agreed on such an excellent timing, because, well, only one day after we proposed the recovery plan, I have the wonderful opportunity to explain what is going on. So as you already told, there will be on top to the regular MFF, that is 1.1 trillion, there will be 750 billion as recovery plan, as next generation EU. And that means that we are reacting to this unprecedented crisis on twofold. So it has to address the greatest need and the greatest opportunity in front of us. So the greatest need is to stimulate the European economy so that it will again return to our strength that it was there before the crisis. But at the same time, we should use this moment to fast track Europe towards an economy that is more sustainable and technologically advanced. So I believe that Commission's recovery plan for Europe sends exactly this clear message, that to repair Europe's economy and prepare its future competitiveness. The Green Deal will be at the heart of this recovery plan. And why it's next generation EU? Because this competitiveness will help next generations. And I have fought inside the college explain that energy system is also a very important part because it was deeply affected by the pandemic crisis. And well, it is not so obvious because, well, not too many of us noticed anything going on sitting at home. So no disruptions as a supply chain. But if we, this is not, we shouldn't think that this sense of security is for granted, because if we dig deeper, the figures tell us different story. So for our recovery package, there is also a very important part for energy sector, and we know that there are different mechanisms. So I hope that later on I will have a chance to introduce to them more closely.
Thank you very much. Can I just push you a bit further on understanding the strategic logic behind this? So you are saying we want the Green Deal is at the heart of the recovery. We want a green recovery. Yet a lot of people are just worried about going back to work and having a job. So isn't it a problem that we invest only in green and old jobs disappear? I mean, can we create new jobs quickly enough, or is this? I mean, is this actually feasible to get a recovery that's green?
Well, this was not what I was saying, that we will invest only green, because this mainstream that 25% of the investment should go to the climate targets will remain also for next generation EU, as it was already for MFF. But well, even if you invest into green investments, you will create jobs. There are wonderful examples for that. But well, those different programs, they will help us to build us future-proof energy infrastructure. And for example, if we will make bigger the Invest EU, then the sustainable infrastructure window, which will be doubled, helps us in particular for renewable energy, interconnections, but also with renovation wave. And if we keep in mind that across EU, 10% of GDP comes from construction sector, and construction sector was hit significantly. That 11 million jobs are in this sector, and renovation wave allows us to create new jobs in renovation sector all across EU in every region. Then this helps us to achieve our energy efficiency targets, but at the same time create jobs, because construction is a very labor-intensive sector.
Okay, thank you. Let me bring in now Mr. Starace from Enel. I mean, of course, the energy sector, we just heard this, has been very much hit. Energy demand has been down. Prices for fuel energy, I mean, for oil, have been also incredibly low in the last period. Is this recovery fund and the idea of a green recovery, is that going to be helpful for the energy sector, for your company? And can you explain how so?
Well, I think that before the COVID-19 crisis, the Commission had already anticipated that a Green Deal coupled with a big effort on digital transformation was something that made a lot of sense to speed up a transformation that was already underway. I mean, the technology changes that are stimulating this transformation are unstoppable. And I think it was very wise from the Commission standpoint that that was recognized and actually used as a tool to stimulate the economy further. Let's not forget that there were two big columns of this structure. One was the Green Deal, and the other was the Just Transition Fund. You remember this huge effort that was, I think, a clever move to remove obstacles to a transformation that is benefiting everybody. So maybe what you can say is that the COVID-19 is maybe a catalyzer of an acceleration in this direction, because I think it makes a lot of sense that we don't replicate some of the mistakes made in the previous economic crisis, when a lot of money were thrown at rebuilding systems that we knew already were at the end of their useful lifetime, and we knew already were not sustainable on the medium long term. So I think it is extremely timely and very wise that the Recovery Fund has this huge connotation of coupling the just transition with an enhanced funding, and we saw that in the package, and establishing clear preference criteria for what is in the energy transition, what is going in the right direction in the energy transition. And these trends of decarbonization and subsequent deeper electrification of economy are things that are going to happen everywhere in the world. Obviously, this is not just a European thing. It's happening. Even people are not conscious about it. But if a government or a part of the world makes it a conscious effort to go in that direction, then that part of the world gains an advantage from a competitiveness standpoint. So sustainability has many different connotation and attributes, but if you want to see what is a sustainable attribute in the power or in the energy sector, clearly you say that what is sustainable is also intrinsically more resilient. What is sustainable is also intrinsically more competitive. And what is sustainable is intrinsically more secure from an energy standpoint. So if you want to go back a little bit in time, Europe was united in a big weakness that was its dependence from fossil fuels. And that was, and still is, a weak point of the European security of supply point of view. So the less we depend on fossil fuels, removing all the other considerations on the environment, the less we depend on fossil fuels, the more secure we are from a strategic standpoint, the more competitive we are going forward. So we think this is extremely positive from our standpoint, and it goes fully in the direction which we see technologies pushing. Clearly, there are, I think, a lot of things that you can improve in any package. There's not a perfect package in the world. Sure, but I would say that a package that is 80% right, it's already a miracle. And this seems to be above that threshold. I think there is a big chance that this is the right time for an accelerated transition. Member states will have, of course, to work a lot, to put the various infrastructures in order. I think interconnectivity and networks need to be definitely much more at the center of the interest of member states. We cover the whole value chain: generation, transmission, distribution. Yes. But if you have to say, the debate on energy is 80% about generation and 20% about interconnection and distribution, I think it's wrong. I think it's something that we have in our mind, but we have really to make a conscious effort to say, really, that interconnection infrastructure, the resilience of it vis-a-vis extreme events that are now more and more frequent, the pervasivity into the society, the digital transformation, and the attributes that they can, it's a big thing. And so I think it's clever that this commission finally has seen this as a key point. I mean, it's a big, for me, the connectivity.
Well, can we? I mean, since you mentioned the member states, and you mentioned the need for also physical infrastructure connectivity and investments in that space, and let me perhaps on that point bring in the commissioner and tie it back to this question of the recovery. I mean, one key issue for the recovery is that we invest, but that we invest relatively quickly, right? So that the demand effect is there, and that new jobs are being generated. So how quickly can we really invest in these rather long-term infrastructure projects that that Mr. Starace has emphasized. I mean, can we really roll out an investment program that will be timely and really quickly unrolled?
Well, in our recovery package, there are there is a dual impact. There is a short-term measures and longer-term measures. And well, in short term, yes, there are solutions where we do have ready projects in the pipeline already that you can finance quickly. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that that according to the International Energy Agency's just published report, well, this year, 2020, the world energy investments fell significantly. So all across the world, roughly decline was 400 billion. This is about 20%. And we have seen it also here in Europe. Well, of course, the volatility of the fossil fuels and fossil fuel investments, they are not so significant here, but well, even the renewable sector was very significantly impacted. And we can compensate some investments, but of course, without private investments, we will not achieve our goals. So we have to send out also a very clear message that that we will not postpone our ambitious climate targets. They are still in the center of our recovery plan, and that gives also a clear signal for the private investments. To accommodate, for example, more renewables, well, most obvious place where you can produce more renewables than right now are offshore wind parks. Well, of course, we have to invest into grids, because offshore wind parks, they tend to be built in the regions where you don't have any grids right now. And that's why we will continue with those grants that will help build interconnectors. And in the autumn, we also have a offshore energy policy paper from the Commission side.
Mm-hmm. So Mr. Starace, can you explain a bit further? I mean, this element where I just cut you off, which is about really the tools and what kind of instruments are there to do we have now in that space that can be unrolled quickly? What kind of investments can be done quickly? I mean, also perhaps from a company perspective. I mean, if you were now to be a recipient of some funds to unroll, let's say, a new investment in hydrogen or something similar, I mean, how quickly can you do these things?
You know, I think that the most important part for us is not really in terms of funding, but in terms of enabling a faster deployment of capital in a short time. So if you look at the plans, not only Enel, but in general, the utilities across Europe have in the direction of decarbonization, so phasing out thermal generation, phasing in renewable energy generation, digitizing the distribution networks, adding interconnection between different areas of Europe. These plans could accelerate if, in general, I would say, long permitting processes that exist across the various states. You know, we are present in many geographies. They have in common quite a lengthy process of authorization for infrastructure that already should be authorized before. So I think it's more a question of time than of money, at least for our business. When you look a little further out, so let's talk, for example, about hydrogen. This hydrogen is, of course, something that will become materially important, if ever, in a 5 to 10 years time horizon. So it's not that today you're changing the world with hydrogen in Europe, because it's just starting now, and it's not. But when you look at hydrogen, I think you need to be very clear and to avoid dead ends. So there is a very carbon-intensive hydrogen production across Europe already. It's made out of reforming gas and in some cases even coal. That is extremely carbon-intensive. We think Europe can lead the way to a green hydrogen generation future. It's a question of being very focused on what technology improvements need to be done on the hydrolysis technology. And we know that this can be done in a 5 years time horizon, and the International Energy Agency is supporting this view. I would say that making it clear that hydrogen itself is not a form of energy, it's a way of storing energy. So it's a way of making the energy system more flexible and decarbonizing energy sectors that today pose a problem in the energy supply chain. So that is something that only a deeper analysis can surface. You can always make a case that CCS and the eternal promise of decarbonizing what carbon is left free in the atmosphere is always something there, but there are dead ends in technologies. Not all new technologies are successful. So just because a technology is new, it's not a guarantee that it will be a successful technology everywhere. And we have been trying to have a successful commercially available CCS as an industry, not just Enel, for the last 15 years. And we have collectively in the world invested $10 billion in trying to have successful commercially available CCS technology, not technological working plants. They do exist, and they cost too much. It's a question of making it fly from an economical standpoint. That, for me, is a little bit question mark. A completely new way, which is saying I will produce hydrogen using decarbonized electricity with an hydrolytic solution. That is something new, and that is worth trying. And I think in that case, funding from the EU would definitely encourage the establishment of a European industry in this field. No one today can claim to have a leadership from an industry standpoint, not even a Chinese. So it's a wide open space, and we've made already these mistakes with the PV technology, others with the batteries. Maybe we can avoid it this time. Right. So it's a good chance, and I think we would definitely be engaged in this sense. If you ask me, will you reinvest in CCS? My answer is no, because we tried already. Others might try, but not us. We don't think it's ever going to fly.
So Commissioner, perhaps you can say a word about hydrogen, because in the package, according to at least to a report by Reuters, there is a support scheme of 1.3 billion, something like this. So hydrogen, and there's also a lot of discussion about green steel, which uses hydrogen as a basis. So can you just explain, Commissioner Simpson, what is the strategy, the hydrogen strategy that you are pursuing?
Yes, of course I can. But well, before I will share my views with you about hydrogen, may I react to two topics that Mr. Starace just mentioned? And one of them was that can we react quickly to those extraordinary circumstances? And well, one part of this Next Generation EU is under the headline, the REACT EU instrument, 55 billion euros. This will be a top-up to the broader cohesion policy, and for exactly the years 2020-2022, so right now. And this will support also green investments, and that means it could be used for renovation wave, or potentially local electricity grids, or exactly for this innovative clean hydrogen production solutions. So, and another topic that I wanted to also mention was this European industry. So one reason why several renewable projects are postponed was broken supply chain. Suddenly we discovered that we are very dependent on production outside of the European Union. And because of that, I have insisted to get the message across that the energy sector is a strategically important ecosystem for European industrial economy. And I'm very happy that we have created also a new strategic investment facility to support investments in European strategic value chain. And this budget will be 50 billion euro. And I'm sure energy sector will benefit from it because, well, this we can also use it to support infrastructure or renewable energy technologies. So we can also use it for storage technologies. We can use it for clean hydrogen and fuel cell applications. So right now, I can say that there are different instruments where you can get investments and support for new technologies, and that means also clean hydrogen. So we are planning to have a communication on hydrogen already according to the working plan that was adopted only yesterday, so already in June. And this is a very important part of our energy system integration, because there are sectors that are not so easily, well, you can't electrify them. So chemical sector, steel, heavy duty vehicles, and in that context, we see that hydrogen, clean hydrogen, can help us to achieve our carbon neutrality target. And this communication on strategic outlook for building a hydrogen economy in Europe will accompany then our energy sector integration strategy. And because we believe that hydrogen has a high potential as an energy carrier, and it has a it is very useful solution how we can store renewables, and it has also central role for decarbonizing our system. So we know that right now it represents less than 2%, but in our long-term strategy, it might be as significant as 10 or in up to 16% by 2050.
So I start having already questions from the audience, and perhaps I can group them. I mean, there's and you both can perhaps react to them. So one person called Anonymous asked the question: what will be the role of gas in future regulations? Could current low prices for gas jeopardize investments in renewables? And not unrelated is a question by Siobhan Siobhan Hall, who asks, will there be public funding available for developing clean hydrogen based on natural gas? So these are two very specific questions on gas. And if you could perhaps answer them to the extent that you can, and share your views. And perhaps, Mr. Starace, we start with you. I mean, if you can enlarge a bit on the role of gas in the future energy mix, and you know, whether gas might delay renewables, that would be very interesting.
This is a very frequent question. You know, what about the low prices of gas? Will it slow down the renewable? If you take the US as an example, US has now had for, I would say, the last 5 years, the lowest prices of gas in the whole of the USA, with levels that have been sometimes 3 times lower than Europe in the past years. And even in that case, the generation fleet of the US has largely developed on renewables in a very competitive gas and low price environment. The thing is that there is no way you can certainly predict the prices of gas in a longer time period of 1 or 2 years. So no one really believes that gas will have a certain future vis-a-vis a zero-cost marginal energy system once it's built. So that is the reason why in the US, most of the utilities that switch off coal plants, they go with a blend of gas and renewables with growing renewable portion to hedge the instability of gas prices going forward. And I think this is going to happen in Europe in a very large way, and probably even faster, given the fact that Europe does not have the same shale gas and gas production that the US has. So the instability of gas prices is going to be as a volatility and as turbulence larger than people think. I think gas will have a future in two directions. One, as a fuel that is needed also for chemical applications that are very important in the European industry system. Less and less as a power generation medium. But probably for the next 10 to 15 years, it will still be marginally important because of the need to fulfill the void that coal exits are going to create in the European system. It's a 10, 15 years time horizon, and it might be longer only if renewables, for some reasons that I cannot understand, miss the deadlines or fail to grow enough, fast enough. So it's just a question of what renewables do rather than what gas can do. There is no, the prices of gas do not really affect its growth anymore, not in our predictions, not in, and I think in anybody's prediction. And so far as the other question, I think, as I said, clean gas out of hydrogen, out of methane, out of natural gas, green hydrogen out of natural gas require closing the loop of carbon with a CCS. And I've already said that for us, the CCS is a dead end. So I hope it works, okay, but we gave up time ago.
Commissioner.
So the second question was exactly about CCS, that will we finance hydrogen projects according to the type of hydrogen that they are using. Right now, well, the majority of the investments, they have come for the pilot projects, exactly for steel industry, where hydrogen can't compete yet because the price is too high, and we need to work seriously to create the market. Because if we increase the volumes, then previous experiences are showing that prices are coming down. But well, it would be very interesting to hear why CCS is out of question in this particular case. I know that in European Union it's not very common, but there are lots of examples around the world. So about the role of the gas. So according to our long-term strategy, natural gas has a role during our transition period. But of course, to achieve our 2050 targets, we're talking more about decarbonized gases. And again, well, biogases, but also hydrogen. But right now, we are still investing into the some interconnectors. We are completing the cross-border gas pipelines because this is our legacy that came with 12 years old. 12 years ago, there was a serious gas crisis. And after that, the European Union decided that we have to secure the supply chain for all the member states. And doing so, we keep in mind that gas pipelines, we can retrofit them so that they will be useful also in the future when we need to transport hydrogen. We are also still with our projects of common interest investing into the LNG terminals because for some member states, LNG has been the additional entry point for securing their energy supply. But as I have promised the European Parliament, we will review the 10E regulation. 10E is then Trans-European Network for Energy, so that we can finance with EU money more electricity grids, interconnectors, also grids to offshore big wind parks, And we right now discuss how we can add also storage options, because if we will move towards using more renewables, that means more electricity, and that means that we have to solve the storage problem.
Since you mentioned the LNG harbors and facilities in harbors, I mean, I cannot resist, Commissioner, to ask you about Nord Stream 2 and the gas pipeline that is being built between Russia and Germany, that is under, of course, heavy criticism from the United States. I think the outgoing US ambassador to Berlin has just again in an interview made clear that sanctions are on the table. I mean, do we need these ports because we might have to shut down our energy pipelines vis-a-vis Russia because of US pressure?
Well, from our point of view, European Commission a year ago amended a gas directive, and this will apply to all the gas pipelines that are entering or who are coming from third countries, and it happened 23rd of May last year. So now we know that even German Bundesnetzagentur has made the decision that this applies to the Nord Stream 2 too. And if they can secure unbundling, we know that tariffs are fair, and all the other amendments that were added to the gas directive, then from our side, we have done everything to secure the fair operation.
Okay, so perhaps one more question I want to ask, still mostly to the Commissioner, which is about building renovations and insulations, and perhaps also to Mr. Starace this question. I mean, so one key plank, if I understand correctly, of the recovery plan is to provide actual funding to do so. Can you give us more details on what the Commission plans to do and how this will be unrolled?
Well, yes. Well, the Renovation Wave initiative, this is very broadly supported, both by members of European Parliament and also national governments, because you can find inefficient buildings all across Europe, and you also can deal with energy poverty, because after renovation, the heating bills or cooling bills in southern part of Europe will be significantly smaller. And we will, from our side, we will address potential barriers and add significant financing, so that our target is that we can renovate twice as much as so far. And because energy efficiency first is still our main ambition, so the cleanest energy is energy that we don't need to use, then renovation helps us a lot, because buildings are spending a lot of energy across Europe. So our particular attention is directed towards schools and hospitals and housing. There are some regulatory barriers in some member states, because multi-apartment housing, well, this is a difficult client, especially when you will blend grants and loans, because there are lots of owners. So we will share best practices, because, well, these are actually the buildings that might be 30, 40 years old when we even didn't discuss energy efficiency as such. So from our point of view, addition to the financing, we need best practices, because in some regions across Europe, member states have solved them wonderfully. And of course, well, together with CIP, we have this we do have already good tools. So reinforced ELENA facility is one of the immediate priorities.
Guntram, can I?
Yes, Mr. Starace, can you say a word about energy efficiency as well? That would be
I think that this was a very important question, because this is a super important part of this whole package. Why that? Because if you look at Europe, it's quite a unique situation around the world. We have literally more than 500 million people living in a very dense continent, full of houses that have average ages that go from centuries in many cases to at least 30, 40 years. So you can imagine the complexity of dealing with that. And I think, let aside the condominium nightmare that is really difficult to tackle, but just from a technological standpoint, but you can imagine also the incredible potential for efficiency that this brings about. Apart from the US, which is the world champion of waste in terms of energy in buildings and living conditions, the US is really in another league. Europe is an incredible sink of energy wasted in buildings, public, private, industrial, commercial, you name it. So I think the focus of this commission in this is super important. It's clearly also very important that there is some kind of best practice sharing across the member states, because there are success stories and not successful stories too. So why this works and why this doesn't work, it's really important that we all get together and learn from that. We think it's also an incredible labor-intensive segment. It will release a lot of jobs and create a lot of jobs across Europe for at least a decade. I mean, this is not something that can be done overnight. It's exactly. Going to go for a long time. Once it started, it will also result in better quality of living in cities, because much of the pollution in cities that today we say it's the cars. It's also the cars, but it's also the heating systems and the air conditioning systems and everything in cities that need to be fixed. So there is so much in this that I think it is worth, just this point is worth an hour discussion. It's an incredible array of technologies. It's a mind-boggling source of innovation around this that makes sense. And if I can, I want to add a point to what Commissioner Simpson said that is really important. We forgot in Europe to monitor the industrial value chain critical parts. I think it's really important that batteries, for example, technology around that, the evolution of this technology, can we leave it to another parts of the world? Why is it that we cannot be at least impartially in charge and in control of this important part of the value chain of the energy system going forward? PV panels, if it's true that Europe will go strongly into solar, at least in many countries, why is it that we only have one factory left, which, by the way, is there just because we invested in it, so even in worse times, and everything is now manufactured in China? How about inverters? And how about the hydrogen value chain? I think it's time to focus on also the strategic view that Europe must have at least some control. I'm not saying it has to be fully autonomous, because this is kind of a view that the world cannot sustain, but at least partially in control of vital part of the value chain, as it was for many years. We had huge industrial complexes, Siemens, Alstom, that managed the full value chain. Now this is kind of disappeared, and we have to be careful that we build our security also on the control of the industrial value chain.
Yeah, that's I think a very important.
I think it's important.
I think it's an important. So we talked about energy efficiency, but we should equally talk about energy production and the value chains around the production capacities. And of course, we know that we lost a lot of the solar energy production sector. So we have a question here by Mr. Yannick Rack of S&P Global, who asks whether Commissioner Simpson could provide some details on the specific measures for renewables, including the funding. Would the EU organize block-wide tenders? And if I can add the question, how do you make sure that the production and the value chains remain as much as possible in Europe? If you could spend a bit of time explaining that to our listeners.
Well, as you may know, right now we are in a position where all our member states have provided us with their national energy and climate plans. And there are legally binding targets. One of them is exactly a share of renewable energy. So we do have a plan that it will raise from the level of 18.9 that we had 2018, and it will the target is 32% for 2030. So all the national governments have debated and adopted the plans, how will they achieve their individual targets. And they know also the needed investments for that. And then they can of course, use also EU funds for them. So from our side, we do see that there are two very important investments that are not bankable. One of them is interconnectors, because to accommodate more renewables, you need regional markets, and for that reason, the majority of our investments for projects of common interest is going to electricity field. And the other perspective is, of course, that we should accommodate the cooperation between member states. And just a month ago, we launched the mechanism so that different member states can cooperate, and all of them will get their fair share for renewable targets. So if we do have some member states who, for example, don't have shallow coastal waters, but they would also like to invest into offshore wind, then they can do so. And well, just to come back for energy efficiency, because the other binding target is energy efficiency, and all the member states have to well invest also to those measures that help us to spend less energy. So the binding target is that by 2030 we should use 32.5% less energy than happens when we will continue with business as usual. And if we are talking about greenhouse gases, then it corresponds, if you compare year 2030 with the year 1990, then it corresponds to the approximately 45% reduction of greenhouse gases. So you know that our President Ursula von der Leyen has raised the target 50 or responsible way to 55%. So now we are starting to negotiate with member states. What can we do more, and how we can use cleverly the additional investments, so that not only in the housing sector or also in transport we will use less energy.
So sorry, I was cut off for 1 second, but I'm sorry, I don't know what happens. It's the computer.
Too many listeners.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm actually getting a lot of questions now, and so we have very little time. So I would like to actually group a few questions, if you allow me, and start with you, Mr. Starace, because a few questions are actually directly addressed to you, and I'll just read them to you. Mm-hmm. So there's one person called Javier Font who asked the question to you specifically: will the post-pandemic environment foster the consolidation of the energy sector in the EU? And there's a second question for you. Let me find that also to you specifically. What do you think of the European Commission's proposal to have an EU-wide tender for renewables? If you could take those two questions, and then I come afterwards to Commissioner Simpson with two other questions.
So broadly speaking, I think anything that becomes EU-wide vis-a-vis nation or member state-wide is better for the industry. This is from a directional standpoint. It's very, very clear rule of thumb. And this industry needs dimension and scale. So EU-wide tenders are better than member state tenders. And they are probably a more efficient way also of accelerating member state action wherever they are a little bit dragging their feet. So all in all, I'm absolutely in favor of that. Insofar consolidation is concerned, I think the COVID-19 would probably not really be the catalyzer. It's more a trend that has a longer drift. This is an industry that needs scale to be efficient and bring down costs. That's all it is about, and it's nothing different than any other industries. Okay, so it's not about the COVID-19 or whatever. It's more about dimension and where that makes sense. Okay. And in that sense, I think there will be certainly consolidation further. There are still smaller players that I think will be increasingly in difficult situation when you look at competitiveness. But all in all, I think rather than a consolidation, I would say it's more a complement game. There are two fields. One is the field of companies that specialize in a certain segment of the value chain. So I want to be only a generator, I want to be only a distributor, and I think I'm going good at it. So I'm focusing on a part of the value chain, and that's one field. And the other field is companies like us and many others like us that says, I look at the whole value chain. It's too difficult to predict which is the right spot because technology is evolving very quickly. I am becoming a generalist on the value chain. And I think these two models are now surfacing in Europe. It will be probably clear in the next 5 years which model the investors like more, and that will probably be the catalyzer of consolidation.
Thank you. So, Commissioner, I have also two questions which I think are very relevant for you. One is on the latest International Energy Agency World Energy Investment Report. According to this listener, the annual fall in global energy investment was by 400 billion, 20% due to COVID-19. That's the number he's giving according to the IEA report. And the question is, will the EU recovery fund and what you put in place be enough to actually make up for the fall in investment that we are currently seeing? So that's one question. And if you allow me a second question, which was about the raw materials and the value chains. I mean, so the question was really whether if we want to tackle this issue of value chains and having production processes more and more at home, can we really do this as long as essentially essential raw materials are imported and we are dependent on a few exporting countries or companies in this regard?
Thank you for the questions. And well, when I was referring to International Energy Agency's latest research, then the falling numbers are worldwide. And I had a chance to discuss this situation, this extreme volatility in the oil market due to the double shock, actually, because of the overproduction in the oil market before OPEC Plus reached an agreement, and because of the another shock that due to the lockdown measures, there was no mobility, and majority of the oil products they are used for transport modes. So when we discussed with G20 energy ministers, they were very worried that this is not attractive for investors to invest into oil fields anymore. From our point of view, we have to send a very clear message to investors who are who are reconsidering their willingness to invest into renewables. Because as I told you already earlier, of course, well, EU funds and even national budgets, they are not enough to achieve our targets. We need significantly more, and majority must come from private investors, and they should do so because renewables will have the future, and also because of that technology is now becoming more competitive, and in a third perspective, well, usually when we use fossil fuels, then we tend to import them. When we use renewables, then we tend to produce them in our own soil. So this is also an important angle. Another question about raw materials. Well, if we witness the disruption of supply chain, then the problem wasn't, well, the problem was the tendency that critical processes or critical industrial investments have moved outside of EU because of different reasons, but exactly this strategic investment facility should give strength to EU enterprises to bring them back, and our good cooperation. And I remind you that this commission is also a geopolitical commission. Our good trade relations should also work for securing the critical materials that our industry needs. Thank you.
So I think we have 2 more minutes. So if you allow me, I will shoot one more question at you and be very quick on this one. So we got or 2 questions, one for each of you, but very quick answers, please. I mean, one question is about industrial processes, which are apparently the largest global energy use. And if we could get a sense of what is the plan to really decarbonize the production, and do we fund innovation in that field sufficiently? The other question that I found quite interesting is that is by a person called Silke Konrad, and she asked whether the massive electrification of heating and transport with renewables will make energy more volatile, and can we do this without nuclear energy as a backup? So I don't know if one of you wants to take one question and the other, but perhaps Mr. Starace, I start with you, and then the last word to the Commissioner.
So let me try to answer to the second question, because this is also quite a recurring question, okay? The massive electrification of transportation and heating, even some industrial processes that today can be electrified, will definitely enlarge and increase the demand of electricity. And if that is increasingly manufactured or produced by renewable energy sources, there is a tendency to argue that then it will become difficult to balance the supply and demand going forward. But if you know how this works a little bit from the inside, as we do have, that statistically, the larger the base, the more interconnected the systems, the better is to manage this. It's also true that today technology allows demand response technologies exist, and battery storage will play an increasing role in managing intraday fluctuations, so hourly changes in supply and demand disequilibriums, seasonal supply and demand disequilibriums, or multi-day supply and demand disequilibriums. Will need to have additional technologies to be developed that include pump storage, and hydrogen as a way of storing energy. So I think that is something that we will probably hit. I mean, we will probably reach this kind of critical systems in a time period between 25 and 2030, not now. I mean, today there is not a single part of Europe that has an impending problem to do this. And you have plenty of time to really plan around this issue. That doesn't mean that nuclear energy is there's nothing wrong with it. I just say that, you know, if you look at the time it takes to plan and build a nuclear plant, if you start now, you're looking at 2035. So it's kind of really far out. It's more important maybe to keep the ones that are working in good condition, and that's a big effort, as you all know. I think for the nuclear industry has such a long time cycle that you need to be very careful not to make mistakes going too far out in time, because technology evolves quicker than before. Everything that doesn't get done in 3 years seems to be kind of old by the time you finish. So that's something we have learned in our life, in our industry. We have written off billions and billions because of mistakes made on this kind of trick, and we don't want to do that again.
Wonderful. So the energy system is outdated after 3 years. That's a big lesson already.
You have to be very careful, yeah.
Yes. Commissioner Simpson, on perhaps the last word quickly on the industrial processes, but also if you want to say something else as a last word, and then we conclude.
Thank you. Well, on nuclear, well, according to our treaty, this is every member state's own decision what their energy mix consists. And from our point of view, we are responsible for nuclear safety, both here in the European Union, and we closely cooperate with our closest neighborhood so that new installations will be safe also. About industrial, well, this is actually the topic that will be covered by our energy system integration. So how we can use more waste heat coming from industry or for data centers, and how we can create a system that is more circular. So we will deal with those questions already in June, when the energy system integration strategy will be adopted by Commission. Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Simpson. Thank you so much, Mr. Starace from Enel. It was really wonderful to host both of you and for this very open and frank discussion. And let me thank all of our listeners online and all the active questions that the participation through questions online. It was really a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, and stay tuned with Bruegel. I'm sure we will have more events on this topic going forward. Thank you so much.